Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Fear. Fear is something that all of us experience at one point in our lives, maybe even many points. Certainly when a person decides to go into business for themselves, that fear can overwhelm us as we decide what we're going to do as we move forward to see how we can get it off the ground. Most people think one of the most important elements when it comes to building a business is certainly finding the income, financing, things like that besides the big idea. But our biggest fear is also whether or not the idea we want to put forward as we begin a business is going to be the thing that's going to make things work out for us. Well, the real currency is simply not just money, but it's actually communicating clearly at a poised, measured pace. On the Beyond 50 radio program today, we're joined by an expert in communication who can clearly help people overcome their fear of public speaking and promote themselves as well as their ideas with effective speech techniques. He's currently Senior Associate Instructor at New York Speech Coaching in New York City, and he uses his training and experience, and more importantly, his intuition to figure out the key action steps that works for each individual client. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest and author of the book, Better Business Speech, Techniques, Tricks, and Shortcuts for Public Speaking at Work. Our guest, Paul Geiger. Paul, thank you for being on the program today.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for having me.
Well, here we go, Paul. Let's just kick right out of the gate. How would you critique my opener?
I thought your opener was very well organized. I think that you spoke at a measured pace. I think the most important thing is to let your listeners know that you're taking them somewhere, and you did that with style and panache.
Not to mention, I articulated the vernacular and what we would call a very ad-lib style, to say the least.
Yes. Well, that's the big thing, Daniel. You know, with speech coaching, you never want to sound like you're stilted and you're not having a good time while you're speaking. In other words, you may feel very nervous, but you want to make sure your listeners know that you're being really authentic, whether you are being humorous or you're being serious, hopefully a combination of both. But I think that the real key is that authenticity, yet all of the forces that are at work when we have to communicate for business tend to send us in a direction where it makes it more difficult to be authentic.
I think that's what's exciting at times when you have the opportunity to listen to radio, the really good hosts who actually create a theater of the mind. And when you get out there in the world where people are actually doing, let's say, public speaking, well, you see the person there, so a lot of that theater of the mind kind of gets wiped away because you have a visual. So as you were talking about, it isn't so much the simplicity of the tricks or the techniques that you teach, but it's the retraining of the mind and the body, especially the body language itself, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. And part of it is certainly the physical side of speech is the body language, the combination of facial expressions, proper eye contact, posture, gestures. That's all a part of it. But I find the biggest piece is really training everybody how to access their breathing for good speech. Because most people, since we breathe in an involuntary way, don't really think about breathing all that much, and most people don't really think about their speech technique because nobody really instructs you about speech technique. We all learned how to speak simply by imitating our parents and then siblings and then classmates and professors and whatnot, so we develop our own speaking style, but we never stop to think about what's really going on physically. And because there are physical reactions that people have to public speaking and being in public speaking scenarios, you've got to address the physical as well. You've got to have something to help you mitigate all of that physical stress.
You know, I like that you pointed out about the physical attention there. I remember there was a time as we would, there was a gathering we had where people who were in business, it was a particular magazine where they decided once a month, what do you say that all the businesses that advertise in this magazine come together. We have our sort of like a little business forum where we get together and share ideas about how we can improve on our business, things like that. And there was one time we went, and there were probably at least 24 of us. And so they decided to go around the room and find out or allow people to tell us what it was they do in their business. And there was this one lady, I was watching her, and it was funny because they allowed her to just amble on and on and on about what it was she did in her business. It was a sort of a natural healing coaching business, I guess. And as she kept rambling on and on, she became more and more tired, and by the end of her finally finishing what it was she was telling us about her business and what she does, I wasn't really sure what her business was, and I thought to myself, if I went to go to naturally heal and get coached to be more energized, I certainly wouldn't go to her. She seemed tired about explaining it, and I talked to her afterwards, of course, and I said, we need to work on an elevator speech for you because, quite frankly, I would never want to go to your business because you don't look like you want to be there either.
That's right. That's right. The physical side, she was probably suffering from just not breathing enough. Because if you don't breathe deeply while you are speaking, and by the way, business communications, it's all public speaking. It's one form of public speaking or another. So you have to have that forward momentum. You've got to give yourself that vocal fuel. That's important, but you also you just brought up another really important aspect of public speaking, Daniel, and that is being able to speak a truly concise message. I talk about it in the book. I use a term. Many of my clients had come to me saying, well, here's my pitch. Here's my elevator pitch, and all of them were just too long. So I decided, okay, what I'm going to call it is a bumper sticker, because you can only fit that message on the back of a car bumper. And if you can whittle down your message to a bumper sticker, you've achieved this clarity of thought that will stay with you. Everything else will support it. You can go into details, but you need to have a central theme so that, number one, you don't fall off track, and number two, so your listeners have a strong framework so they know what it is you're talking about.
Right.
You brought up, the critique that you don't want to get, which is, wait a minute, what is her business really about?
And that's where I believe people could actually learn a lot from radio, especially, and television as far as the commercials, is really listening to what's being said. Yeah. As you talk about expressing what your business does, the idea is that you're expressing the key emotional components of your business that fulfill the needs of the people listening. Right. Would that be accurate?
It would. It would. And, it's kind of interesting when people ask, well, what do you do as a speech coach? And I said, I fulfill my clients' priorities. And the two most important are comfort and consistency. Being able to do those two things in the face of sometimes very high stakes is an achievement. And if I can get people to do that, then they find that they're able to take their careers in whatever direction they want to go.
Well, I figured you would probably, Paul, do something more unique, like say, I expunge the fear of death about you standing in front of people talking. In fact, here's a fun story. I love sharing this, especially in the realm of what we're talking about here today. Most people who are pretty close to 50 know who the Brady Bunch is. And I'm sure at one point in their lives they remember that one particular episode. I think it was Jan who had to get up in front of the class and give a speech. And it was suggested to her to remove the fear or the jitters, the butterflies, whatever you want to call it, that you picture your audience in their underwear. Have you heard that one before?
Daniel, is that where it started? Because people have brought that up to me over the years.
Yeah, it actually, I'm pretty sure that was the episode. It came from the Brady Bunch. But now here's a caveat that's a lot of fun to know. So that being said, try being in a position that I was in at one time when I was up in Portland, Oregon. We actually did a radio program on nudist colonies. Okay? And so I was invited to go out to a nudist colony, which is outside of Portland in a place called Estacada, Oregon. And apparently it's the oldest nudist colony in the United States, to go out and talk about what our radio show is to their audience. Yeah. Now, I didn't have to picture them in their underwear. I got to see them without any at all. Try giving a speech to 30 or 40 people and, without a stitch of clothing on. That's a very surreal experience.
Right. Basically what you're saying, Daniel, is you didn't have to use much imagination at all.
Not at all. I had to get over the fact that, boy, but it was a very surreal experience, I got to tell you that much.
Oh, God. Now you know that I am going to use that story when I talk to my clients. Can I borrow
Please do.
that one?
You absolutely. Daniel at Beyond 50 Radio had this experience, but it was funny because before I went up there, and we'll make this brief, people were asking me as I told them what I was about to go do, and they said, well, do you plan on being up there naked? And I said, well, maybe, probably, I don't know. And so we got up there, and I wasn't thinking much about it on the way up there, and you go back on a dirt road, and the next thing you know, there was this couple that was coming down the road. The only thing they had on was their tennis shoes. And for some reason, excuse me, people, I guess, in nudist colonies who are used to this, they have to wave at you with their hands high above their head. They're waving back and forth, kind of like a windmill, if you will. And that's when the experience hit me. We're about ready to drive into a land of naked people here, and I've got to get up in front of all these people and talk about the radio show. I don't know. Anyway, so that's that. Now, that's what we get to when we talk about the energy of attention. Let's talk about what that means.
Well, there is something. The energy of attention is something that is real, and I think the reason that I pointed out and the reason that I try to compartmentalize the forces that are at work in public speaking is because too many of my clients lump together everything that's going on into just a general feeling of being nervous, of having nerves. And I think one of the ways to combat the mental awareness of these forces is to be able to put them in their place so that you can learn to habituate with them, so you can become more accustomed to them. So the energy of attention is something you definitely feel even when you're in a one-on-one conversation with another individual. So when their attention is turned toward you and you are the speaker, you're feeling that energy. If you add people into the room or into the communication scenario, suddenly you've got that much more energy coming toward you. The key is to know that that is what it is, and not be surprised, because the body's reaction to being surprised by that feeling is to have a fight or flight response. And I truly believe that that is what triggers the various physical reactions that individuals have, whether their knees get shaky, whether they start to get sweaty palms, they start to move around and fidget. Primarily what it is a stress on the body. And what happens is that you're getting that tension in your core, you're getting that tension in your diaphragm muscle, and then your breathing gets even more shallow. So you don't have much to hold on to physically, and your mind is spinning. And then, of course, from the energy of attention, that triggers a sense of judgment, fear of consequences, and we're off to the races. And you can expect pretty similar results if you don't take the time to compartmentalize where these things are. And the energy of attention is a real thing. It's just like the weather. So if you think that you're going to go outside on a rainy day and you're not going to get wet, guess what? The energy of attention is going to do the same thing to you.
Absolutely. One of the things that I have noticed about people when they get up in front of an audience is sometimes people use gestures in a wonderful way. Like comedians are really good at this.
Right.
And then there are others that just flap around like a bird that's trying to get out of a fish nest, or something like that. So how do you work with something like that? How do you know when you're overdoing it, for instance?
Yeah, well, you do have to adjust your gestures, I believe, to the scale of the situation. In terms of, that can be the number of people, also the size of the venue that you're in. What I tell my clients is you don't think of your gestures as being big, but think of your gestures as always being full. If you have really full gestures, I think then you are grounded in both your body and your impulses that lead to those gestures. So the action steps that help you have fuller gestures is, once again, I know I keep repeating myself, but it bears repetition, the breathing. If you can take a deep breath, hold that breath for a moment, and trust me, you can do this even when you're presenting. because breathing deeply sends a body language message that you're simply thinking about what you're going to say next. So you take that deep breath and then allow yourself to tap into the impulses that lead to the gestures. And 99.9% of the time, my clients have fuller gestures. They're following their impulses, and therefore the gestures are supporting the things that they're saying.
And that also brings us to something that you talk about as well, and I think is very valuable. When you talk about breathing, a lot of times you will see people that'll get out there and they'll just fire every word out of their body until they run out of breath, and then they pass out. And you realize that the pause is a good thing to have, because you can stop, come in, breathe in through your nose, and then continue. But like you said, it also grounds you and allows you to go to the next step. Nobody's in a big hurry. So why do you think you got to get out the old, Encyclopedia Britannica, for instance, in one breath? It just isn't going to happen.
No, and you know what? There are really more negative perceptions that go with speaking quickly than there are positive ones. I find that when you hear somebody speaking too quickly, you can think sometimes that they're trying to overwhelm you, they're trying to steamroll you, maybe they're trying to prove that they're smarter than you are, or maybe they're nervous. So there's a lot of negative perceptions that go with speaking too quickly, yet the forces that are at work often cause individuals to speed up. So you got a lot of things that are going on here in public speaking. And we all kind of know what that feels like because we've all been in that position. So it's good to know that there are things that you can do. And I try to do my best to really give people action steps that they can take in the book. I talk about various, if you know what it is that maybe is bedeviling you, maybe you're speaking too quickly or you're speaking too softly, or you don't know what to do with your hands, that's all addressed so you can find it in the book. But then I'm talking about all the various communication scenarios, meetings and networking events and presentations. So if your stumbling block is a particular scenario, you can learn going through that door in terms of the book and the action steps that are necessary to try to get some effective results.
Now, we talked a little bit about the role of body language, but what about the role of body language from the perspective of the audience, I suppose? Where you're the speaker, for instance, and paying attention, what is your audience doing? Do they seem engaged or interested, or would they rather get up and go get that Starbucks and maybe never come back into the room?
Well, what I tell most of my individuals, Daniel, is don't take on the burden of taking the temperature of everybody in the room. I think that is coupled with the nerves that go along with it. It tends to be too much of a pack on your back to deal with. So you will get the response if you have a clear message, if you are grounded, and really you don't have control over what it is, how they are going to react. I mean, you may anticipate based on the statements that you're making, and you definitely sense the feedback, but you can make subtle adjustments along the way, but don't always, when you're giving a presentation, worry about getting go signs, because you're not exactly sure if they are simply processing what you're saying, thinking about how they relate to what you're saying. It's really difficult to try to take their temperature and evaluate exactly what they're thinking, but you do want to exude that positive body language and give them an opportunity to share in your perspective. And then it is their decision to then look at things from your point of view to also share in that perspective. But what you really need to do, step number one, is make sure that you are communicating that you're ready, willing, and able to share that perspective. So that is really step number one. And one you can't sidestep. You've got to do that first. And I think really good results come from being that disciplined in terms of your delivery.
Now, here's the thing. The reason I wanted to bring that up, because I'm sure you've experienced this, perhaps in your world as you got first started, but that people will read or feel the audience, maybe sense a disinterest, and then they panic. And so the question comes, do they push through that and continue anyway until their time is up, or What do you do in those situations?
Well, my advice is you showed up at the prescribed time in the prescribed location to do a job. You were told to come up and do it. You prepared for it. If you are duly prepared to deliver that message, deliver the message. Follow through on it. And then you can at least know that you lived up to the expectation and the obligation of what you were there to talk about. I think it brings up the little trepidation, or not this little or small trepidation, but a concern that many people have, is that they won't be able to follow through and deliver as dynamic a message as they would like. And I think many people don't understand how important the preparation for a presentation really is. You really have to not only think it through, you actually have to speak it through. Because you never want to be surprised by the sound of your voice when you're in performance mode. You don't want it to be something that is a little foreign to you, that's not locked down. It's not. You don't have forward momentum. You don't have a concise message that you're delivering. So you want to make sure in preparation that you actually speak some of these things so you can feel the words. And I think that will give you much more of an opportunity for success when you actually do deliver them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, it's like you said, and there's another thing we're going to talk about here in a second, those irritating little things people say because of nerves or they don't have anything else to fill in the blanks.
Right.
Sometimes I catch myself doing that. But the point being is that you just kind of go with it because it's with practice and time that you get better and you become more relaxed. Do you think anybody just comes out of the gate being good?
Well, I think that people have a certain talent, a certain innate talent for this. There are certain aspects of it that can be bolstered. I know in my own experience, I had a willingness, certainly a willingness and an ability to habituate and be accustomed with some of those forces that are in public speaking. I didn't have just a dread, a heart-stopping fear of public speaking. So I was able to gain more experience by doing it. And so it helps to have some of those skills, but anyone who is a public speaker needs to develop the other aspects of it and look at all of the moving parts that go into it. Not just assume that somebody's really good at something. Maybe they've had a lot of experience doing it. Maybe, you never know the people that you're watching. They could have had coaching. I believe that these are all skills that once people are made aware of, you can develop over time. And luckily, there's really no age limit on it. We like to think that we're great speakers by the time we're 25 or 30. Some people are. Some people don't really, truly develop that skill till a little bit later. Then again, I have clients who come to see me fresh out of graduation from high school, and I happen to applaud that because I think they're developing skills that will help them throughout their lives.
Wow. And it's always good, too, to have a coach that can help you always become better. So. Yeah.
I often hear individuals come to me and say, well, my friends told me this, or my husband or my wife was in the audience when I gave the speech and they told me that I did this wrong. People can pick out what isn't right. But I think it takes a speech coach to be able to tell you what to do to make they can pick out what's wrong, but speech coaches can actually give you the action steps to make it right and give you the actual advice that will get you there quicker. There's a real reason why in the title of the book I put the word shortcuts. I think somebody who looks at this on a daily basis, the way I do as a self-described voice geek, will know a couple of action steps along the way that can just get you there quicker.
Right. And one of the ones we haven't talked about yet is the idea of keeping something to 3 ideas and no more. Describe what that means.
Well, in my experience, and in my experience just listening to individuals speak, I don't think any of us can really process more than 3 ideas in a sitting. So you've got to make sure that the ideas are truly the important things you want to get across. I'm sure that anyone who is an expert in their area, who has been studying whatever material that they're being asked to present, knows that there's a lot of moving parts, probably a lot of things that are really important, but you have to limit it to the three most important, because you have to understand that people are not going to absorb more than that. And it's crucial to understand that, because I believe that the three-idea limit is also the way that you can come up with a really concise and convincing bumper sticker. Because if you can whittle it down to the three most important ideas and then spend a little time in preparation ruminating about those ideas, you'll come up with the overarching theme that is the bumper sticker. And I believe that that's a key, a true key to presentation success.
Wow, it's amazing to think about how simple a lot of these suggestions and ideas that you come up with are. But again, it's about putting them in motion, because although an idea may seem simple, a lot of times it's the execution and the practice of that idea that people tend to stumble on, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. I say that on a daily basis. The concepts I talk about are not so intense. They're not that detailed. They're easy to understand mentally, but difficult to execute upon.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, I want to thank you for being on the program today. The book is Better Business Speech, Techniques, Tricks, and Shortcuts for Public Speaking at Work. How can people find out more about how to get the book, maybe get your services, things like that?
Sure. Well, the easiest way to find out about speech coaching and the book and me is to simply go to my website, which is paulgeiger.com, and that's Geiger, Geiger.
Very good. Paul, thank you for being on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Daniel, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for all of your interest.
You bet.
And I truly appreciate speaking with your listeners today.
Absolutely. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. You can also discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.